All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. If you are watching live stream today, yay! How
Mhm.
exciting. My name is Dr. Serena Wadhwa. I'm your host of the Pendulum Podcast. And with me tonight, I have Dr. Monika Sharma. Welcome. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So for those of you that watched on April 1st, Dr. Sharma is also going to be talking a little bit about these concepts of particularly courage, which is a huge factor when it comes to stress. And so, why don't we just kind of talk there? I want to share first some slides, talk a little bit, while if you want to just introduce yourself or um, I don't know if you want to say a few words. I just want to first introduce you, and I have like a little bit of information to share about you with our viewers. So, as I usually do, so this is, here we go. So, Dr. Monika Sharma, she is a clinical psychologist. And she's also a life coach and a certified hypnotherapist. And she used to own a group practice, and she is a single mom by choice. And she brings both professional experience or expertise and personal insight into working with clients who are navigating a variety of different issues, including career transitions, major life decisions, and basically, the deeper questions that are going to surface in midlife, that's a lot of different transitions and it takes a lot of courage to do that too. And I'll bring this up too, before we close out, but this is contact information. If you would like to reach Dr. Sharma, you see her website there and also email, phone number, and how to book a consult. Um, but these are some of the general questions that we'll kind of explore. And then I'm going to just keep this up on the screen for just a moment. But I do want the majority of the time to be more about you and I. So first, while we're kind of um, talking about Stress Awareness Month, I was curious to know how might you define stress?
Stress.
Yeah.
I think we're all intimately familiar with what stress feels like if we live here in the
Right.
US.
Yes.
Um, Stress is very much a response in the body that, I think it's physiological, it can be mental, it can be emotional. It is our body going into, it can be inflammation of the body, but it's this survival mode where our stress response in the body can start to like alert us like danger, there's some sort of a threat. And how is it that we can respond in a way that will help our survival? And so the thing about stress in modern day society, which is different than how things used to be before, is that we can experience stress even though something is not actually life threatening, but it somehow threatens our sense of belonging or acceptance. We can start to perceive or imagine threats, and that we can carry that anywhere with us just by thinking about it in our mind. We don't have to be confronted with it in real time. And our body doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's imagined. And so when we think about situations that feel threatening to us, it could be as simple as a deadline or sitting in traffic. It could be even like, what am I going to have for dinner today or whatever. Things like that can start to like work us up. And we start to feel that tension in our body. And it kicks in that fight, flight, freeze response.
Yeah, and that is ever so lasting when it's not interrupted, even,
Yes, yes.
right?
And in nature has designed it so that we only experience those things temporarily when we're truly facing danger. And then we see animals. I have a dog, anytime she gets stressed, she finds a way to release it when she's no longer in that stressful situation. So whether she runs around everywhere and has the zoomies or yawns or shakes, and we as humans would benefit from doing that as well. However, we don't allow ourselves to get out of that stress state to shake it all off. And so we start to carry it with us chronically, and it can start to, take its toll on us physically, emotionally, relationally, our sleep, our digestion, a number of different processes can start to get impacted.
Yeah, that's a really great point, that we're not designed to carry around that excess energy that results from that stress response, and all those chemicals that get released because they
Yeah.
keep getting released. And, I've often talked about the stress recovery period, in the podcast, and how a lot of people don't really know about the stress response or the stress recovery period, that our bodies need that kind of rest and replenish stage, to recover basically. And that we don't give ourselves that opportunity to do that. Kind of like what you were saying about your dog after it goes in the zoomies and just relaxes a little bit. And
Could you imagine if we all did that?
right, I think we would be a little bit happier, like we would just be exhausted, but pleasantly happy too at the same
Yes.
time. And because we're releasing that energy that gets us so wired up and so irritatable to other people and to
Oh,
ourselves.
yeah. And then we would sleep so well at
And we
night.
would seem so much better, right? It would be quite amusing to see a bunch of us having the zoomies all of a sudden. But that's a really great point though, in terms of, why movement and somatics have been such a big shift, in up and coming. A lot of people are now really turning to these different ways of engaging with their bodies and being able to allow their bodies, to do some additional resting and movement that before we really didn't pay attention to. So I think
Mhm.
that's a really great point. And, so kind of getting into the topic, of what you and I previously talked about. We were talking about the work that you do and how that relates to stress awareness and the universal law of mentalism and relativity. So we talked about courage. And
Yeah.
how would you first define courage for our listeners?
I feel like courage is showing up even when we feel some fear, even when we believe things may not work out as we hope, when things feel risky, and that we show up anyway, because we believe we're connecting to something that feels more important than the fear itself.
Oh,
I
that's
mean,
a really great point.
yeah, I mean, you look at any good hero story, right? It's like
Totally.
they're not they're not battling daisies, right? Like they're out there like with dragons and villains and or like just very stressful situations. It could be overcoming, something like a hardship that suddenly happened in life, losing a job. But it's like people who can show up and continue to push forward anyway and without any guarantee of the outcome.
I think it's a really great point, is that you're not focusing even on the outcome. You're more just, I am just showing up for whatever this is. And however it turns out, I'm not going to put too much of my energy into that. Let me just
Mhm.
focus more on the energy of being with whatever this is first. And that let me just concentrate on just being with it first of all.
Mhm. Yeah.
Can you
I
give,
think
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that there are times. So, tying back to also what we talked a little bit about just now in terms of stress and understanding our body. But I think one of the things that happens is that we're not always plugged into our body, we're not always aware and attuned to it. However, there are times when we can almost be like so hyper aware of our body where emotions can be so skyrocketed high, or we can also numb out on the other extreme. But it's this idea that, like, when we can recognize that we're flooded with something, then it does make sense. Like, it's hard to move forward. We mostly, have options where it's like, okay, how do I get myself back down to a workable state? And I can still feel the feelings, but not be so flooded by them that it completely derails us, like takes us off track, clouds our judgment and things. So that is one thing that I do want to say. Courage does mean showing up, but it is also recognizing when things can start to feel, again, just like so elevated, off the charts that we are no longer functioning as well.
I like that. It's like being aware of when you're not like in your optimal kind of
Mhm.
space, and really the idea is how do you how do you keep yourself in this optimal functioning state? I mean,
Hmm.
because that's where we flourish, right? Is when we're in
Yeah.
an optimal state where we can feel, when we talk about like quote unquote stress management.
Yeah.
And I really wish there was a different word for that. Um, because it's always
You'll
like,
have
well,
to make something up. I'd like to hear what you have in mind.
I call it stress optimization is what I call it
I
because it's like,
love that.
oh, thanks. I mean, that's a group that title that I use when I'm doing a mock session with my students, is stress optimization, because it's really about how are we going to optimize your experience because and use it to your advantage because you're not functioning at this
Yeah.
optimal place when you're in this what you described as like these out of control kind of spaces where you're over stressed and you're experiencing all these kind of sensations. Or and you mentioned even just like when you're on the other side of that spectrum, you're not feeling things, and
Hmm.
you're kind of numbed out by things too. So how do you optimize that so that you can get back into a state where you're flourishing? Because it's really what we're all kind of looking for anyways, is
Hmm.
how can I get into this just right zone, so to
Yes.
speak, right?
I think about that. So, and I do think about the weather a lot as a metaphor. I think you refer to the weather all the time too. It's perfect metaphor living in Chicago, where we have four seasons in one given day. Um,
One day.
you never know what to predict. You kind of have to roll with it, right? But
Yeah.
when we think about the weather and how, we can, if there's rain, we know how to plan for that. It doesn't have to stop us in our tracks, even if it's unexpected. We can grab the umbrella, maybe take the car rather than walk, whatever it might be, but we can adapt to that. But when it's like so stormy, a tornado, a hurricane, like that's the kind of weather, that's the kind of intensity that will sweep us off our feet, where we lose visibility, we cannot find our direction. And so, in those moments, and when we can start to recognize the equivalent of that in our body, that's the time to put ourselves inside. Doesn't mean getting rid of the storm. We can't have control over that, but we
Right.
can wait it out. And so, recognizing when it makes more sense to wait it out, finding those grounding techniques to do that. We can observe the storm through the window. We can see it happening. We don't have to pretend we're not trying to delusion ourselves and pretend it's not there and talk ourselves out of that storm
Right.
happening. So it's acknowledging the feeling, acknowledging that storm, but putting us in a place where we can still remain, have some visibility, I guess. We can take a look at it. We can stay connected with ourselves. If it's that intense, like a tornado, we find something to ground us, find the bathtub, find the basement, keep ourselves safe until that level of intensity passes. And then it doesn't need to be sunny again before we continue forward. It just needs to be enough. So we're talking about that optimal state. There's
Yeah.
grounding techniques, just like the bathtub or the basement. There are grounding techniques that we can do to help ourselves to regulate and to find some calm so that we can bring that storm intensity down from a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10 back down, even if it's at a 6 or something that allows us to move forward again. Because stress is so physiological and connected with our thoughts, like our cognitions, the stories that we tell ourselves, there's a number of ways that we can use to ground ourselves when we are starting to feel like that intensity is getting so high that we could get swept away with it. And so, some of it is through the breath because the breath is very physiological. And, I'm sure you talk about this a lot, but there's the two parts of the nervous system, which is the sympathetic, which I think of as for stress, S sympathetic for stress, and the parasympathetic, I think of for peace. And they both cannot be high or low at the same time. So when we're stressed, then the sympathetic goes up. And so what happens at that time is that our heart starts to race, our eyes dilate. We are hyper vigilant. We're on the lookout for danger. So very hyper aware of everything that's happening to take that information in, but it can also be very overwhelming, to our thoughts, cloud everything. We can't think clearly or in an organized state. Our muscles can start to tense. Our energy moves away from digestion in order to fuel our body for that fight flight response. And so when we're chronically in that state, we talked about like how that can start to take a toll on the body. But so that's when the sympathetic is high, is all of those physiological responses start to happen. So in order to bring the sort of like safety response, that peaceful
Yeah.
response back in our body, we can start to address it through our breathing and slow that down again, deepen it and elongate it, become more present with what is. So we can use the five senses to remind ourselves where we are, because oftentimes, again, stress can just be created by what's going on in our mind.
That's-
It doesn't have to be in real time. So, finding those ways physiologically, progressive muscle relaxation as a way of releasing that tension, like allowing our body to sort of release and let go, can be another way to bring that parasympathetic system up. And then also our thoughts, our cognitions, and how we can start to take various perspectives, explore other interpretations or points of view, as ways of helping to ground ourselves and not attach so tightly to our story, which is creating that stress response, and allow more possibility to be available to us.
Yeah, and all of that takes courage in the moment to
It does.
do. Yes, it
It
totally
does.
does. And one thing you said in that is that also, and what I liked is that the courage to recognize that there is a limit to what we can do when we're facing like the storm of a tornado. Like to
Mm,
just recognize that, okay, this is not something that I can delude myself into thinking that I could do something about this
yeah.
because I'm no match for a tornado or a hurricane. So
Yeah.
I need to adjust my plans and let me find an alternative option to go inside, to be safe, to take care of myself, go to the basement, go find the bathtub so that I'm still alive after this and
Absolutely. We are
and
not
not facing
invincible.
right exactly. I mean, but that takes courage, like what you were saying. And I think, it's a great metaphor, to utilize in terms of just recognizing how we sometimes don't do that. We don't do
Mm,
that when we're facing day-to-day stressors or when we're just facing our own experiences of how sometimes we just need that courage to recognize that, oh, I'm not invincible, or I'm not, I do have a limit here. And I think oftentimes we don't realize that we may be at a limit, in our life, and that we need that courage, like what you were saying, is to show up and not to show up for ourselves, and to
mhm,
be available and a resource to ourselves to do something different.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think about some people who may be disconnected from themselves. And so they actually keep showing up and they keep pushing through, but they're not listening to their own limits.
Yeah,
And I see that as different than courage. I see that as perhaps more fear driven, if that makes sense, because what's the
totally.
alternative if I don't keep showing up and doing the thing and pushing myself, and whether it is perfectionism driving it or fear of rejection and pressure to achieve or overachieve, whatever it might be that's driving it, but that feels more fear driven rather than courage driven because courage also means, the courage to say no or not right now.
Yeah, and that's a really great point too, because one of the things that I think happens with that is that usually, at least in my experience, what I've seen is that when people operate more from that fear space, that's usually what leads to burnout and exhaustion, whereas when they're operating from a truer, authentic, genuine courage space, that's more aligned, with heart space, it is
Yeah.
much more restful and optimal for them,
Yeah,
you
yeah. And
know?
I think of it also like Like when it's fear driven, it feels more constrictive.
Yes.
We feel like there's less alternatives available to us. We are more rigid in thinking we have to do it this
Yeah.
way, so there's a constriction piece of it and doesn't feel like there's a lot of options. And if I don't do this or the alternative, then something could go terribly wrong. Again, whether it's real or whether it's imagined. Whereas
Yeah.
courage feels like there's more of an opening, more options
Totally.
available. And again, not that they're easy options. It doesn't mean that
Right.
it's easy, but it's opening. It's an expansion. It's problem solving. It's creative. It's maybe stepping outside of that lane and seeing, thinking outside of the box and seeing what else is available to you.
Yeah, completely. I totally agree with that because I see that, when things are more fear driven, it's very tunnel visioned. It's
Hmm.
very obsessive. It's very compulsive behavior that drives that, whereas with courage, that's more authentic and more heart spaced oriented. Like you
Yeah.
said, it's more expansive. It's more option
Mhm.
driven. It's more, ooh, let's see what kind of creative possibilities that we can come up with,
Yeah.
and it's almost like who said that? Like, because that's not something I would have thought of. Like,
Hmm.
where did that come from? Kind of a
Hmm.
thing. It's almost as though there is um, this kind of creative voice that comes to support what's happening for you when you
Yeah.
allow that voice to be present, and
Hmm.
and part of what we had talked about before too was just kind of how can a person, how, like when you work with clients, how do you help them discern that kind of inner voice when it's more um to help them discern between like a more fear-driven voice or a more intuitive kind of supportive courage voice.
Yeah, it really does require, becoming still with ourselves and allowing some of that white space in our lives to occur. And so, because we're surrounded by noise all the time and it just gets
Yeah.
noisier and noisier. I mean, now, especially with things like social media and who knows even
Oh,
like what is real or not. I mean, just even any regular popular news outlet now, like it just feels like it's more noise. And like, how do you sift through all of that stuff so it can be very much like take us away from ourselves rather than help us to connect with ourselves. And I used to do these weight loss groups. This is like 20 years ago. And so at
I
that time,
remember
so
that.
before all of the social media and stuff, but people were, like, oh, this diet or this supplement or this, and like really listening to everything around them, but not listening to themselves. And so something that I used to help my clients do at that time was starting to look internally and realize that our bodies are sending us signals all the time. If we can pause and listen, just look within and because this external noise takes us further and further away from ourselves. Most of the things that we hear, usually it's coming from somebody who has their own agenda. And if we can start to recognize that, it's packaged under the guise of helping, but
Yeah.
usually they are trying to sell something. They are trying to, in this day and age, like gain likes and popularity. Like absolutely, there's something in this for them.
Right.
And so we have the answers.
Yeah.
We don't have to, it's like if we can start to learn to trust ourselves. So becoming still, allowing for that white space in life, being reflective, stepping away from a lot of like the noise and the devices. Um, we can put on some just like calming music, we can journal, we can be bored, we can try things
What?
with
Did you
yes,
say be bored?
be
What?
bored. Try things with the intention not of getting anything right, but like actually just being curious, messing things up, getting creative, taking walks, be in nature, notice even in the city of Chicago, like
Oh,
there's still trees to be looked at, and like the leaves blowing in the wind and the branches. And there's still things that we can appreciate about nature, just the sky
mhm.
alone. So starting to pay attention and notice those things can help us to start to connect and be
Yeah.
curious within ourselves. Oftentimes, courage if I can like share a couple of stories from my own life
Please.
also,
Yeah.
there's a couple times in my life that I realize, you know, took a lot of courage to pursue. And it usually was not the quote unquote quote like right thing to do or the sensible thing to do. One of those times was when I was in my mid 30s and I was feeling like a lot of restlessness. I was depressed and I felt like I wanted something was calling for me to learn a little bit more about holistic health. And so I found this course, the Institute of Integrative Nutrition in New York City. At the time it was in person. And it just kept like tugging at me and calling to me. And I was in debt. And everyone's like, don't do it. You got to fly to New York City every time. And where are you going to pay for this? You don't have the money. You've got credit card debt and all of these things. And I was like, you're right. You're right. But I just could not stop thinking about it. And so, like, the last day I had to register, I pulled out my credit card and I gave them a call. This is before the online registration things. Gave them a call and I gave them my credit card and I just decided to sign up. I just couldn't ignore it. And even though it made no actual practical sense, then I ended up finding plane tickets. I had to go there 10 times. The first and the last one were like $125 round trip, all taxes and fees included. And the middle 2 to 9 were $98 all in round trip tickets on American Airline. And then I stayed with friends when I was there. I mean, there were so many things that also evolved from that to these, I was
Wow.
introduced to Many Lives, Many Masters, which is a book by Brian Weiss about
Great book.
reincarnation. I'd
Oh
never heard of
God.
it before.
Oh
And
my
I was
God.
like, after one of the lessons, I was like, oh my God, I need to get my hands on this book. And went to stay with my friend first and only time I stayed with this particular friend that week. It was that particular weekend. And I'm telling him all about it. And then I see that book behind his head on the bookshelf. And I'm like, oh my God, that's the book. You've got the book. And he's like, I've never seen this book before in my life. And I just feel like there's like these little things, these pulls, these little tugs or these whispers. And so starting to listen to that. And I was in that place that I could listen at that time because I was feeling depressed and a bit lost. And so I spent a lot of time sort of in the quiet of my apartment at the time
Mm,
and reflecting and journaling. And so that's how I had sort of like tapped into that. I didn't know that that's what it was at the time, but as soon as I walked in that first day, I knew that this is exactly where I was meant to be.
hmm.
The second decision, I won't go into the details, but was having my daughter on my own. And that was also not necessarily like the conventional route that people take. But there were all of these things I couldn't ignore that were just pulling me and pulling me. And as soon as I made the decision, it's like the gates opened and everything, it wasn't easy, but I just somehow was it so at peace with it. And I just knew it. This is exactly what I need to be doing right now. This is meant to be. So, if we can start to allow for that, be curious when you feel a little like tugs and even deja vu or like, just something feels familiar, like just to pay attention. That's,
Yeah, those are, sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was going to say those are our body's ways of tapping in to something bigger than, the stories that we tell ourselves and the supposed tos and to listen, at least be curious.
Yeah, those are really great examples, and I appreciate you sharing personal stories from your life because it just makes it so much more real about how, as especially as professionals, oftentimes people don't think that we go through that. And I appreciate that you are willing to share how those have happened for yourself too.
Mhm.
And what I heard when you were describing those, the synchronicities that just kind of expanded for you as you were just listening to that tug of your inner voice and how things aligned so well for you and just everything just unfolded in that way. It was like that to me. I mean, that takes courage to first do that thing that you're just like, everyone's telling you to be sensible, and you're just like, yeah, that is the sensible thing to do. And yet I am feeling that this is what I need to do, and I'm going to just go for it.
Yeah,
And I think that's like a really important point, that sometimes we all experience that. And I imagine, some of our listeners or if not all of them, have their own stories where they've experienced that. And also, where they did follow that, and other people are telling them, what are you doing? This is not the thing to do. And then all of a sudden it was just like the thing that changed their life. And
absolutely.
really, and just gave them so much more than they expected, and it doesn't have to be anything like, huge life-changing thing, but it really opened up their life. And I think that's
Mhm.
the key, is that optimal stress, right? It's
Hmm.
like that really is what that is about. So,
Yeah. And also, like some of the people I work with are like in midlife, they're going through burnout. A lot of people, all ages now, are going through burnout. Even I have 20-year-old clients who are feeling burnt out and like with their jobs and things. But
mm,
that is, burnout can oftentimes happen also doing the supposed do's, right?
right.
Performing well, doing the shoulds. But that's not necessarily listening to our own, again, wisdom or values and guidance. We're doing the supposed do's that are externally given to us or that we learned somehow along the way, but that takes us further away from ourselves. That is a source of stress. That's, being out of alignment with ourselves can be a source of stress.
Yeah, I call those conditioners.
Mm.
We need a
Yeah.
little bit of fabric softener with those things, is what we need.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I want to just pull up your contact information again and really thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom with us.
This was
And
fun. Thank you.
you are welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Let me just pull this up so people can see how to get a hold of you if they have any questions. Let's see here. Let's go to just move this. Did you have any last moment things that you would like to share before we close?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground.
We certainly did. Well, thank you so much again, Dr. Sharma. I really appreciate it. And I hope, listeners, that you got something out of it. And just on a quick note, the next podcast will be on April 28th. Another guest speaker will be joining us. So thanks for joining us today. And I hope everybody has a great week. All right.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.